Dr. Azeem Ibrahim, it is my honor to have you in our program, in our this discussion, and I welcome you on behalf of our organization, Archer Kent Blood Center for Civil and Political Rights. We are some students here, and we organize and talk to people like you, and we gather people to speak to the issues that are important for our South Asian nations. Dr. Azeem Ibrahim is the research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute, US Army War College, and a director at the Center for Global Policy in Washington, D.C. He received his PhD from the University of Cambridge, after which he completed fellowships at the universities of Oxford, Harvard, Yale. Over the years, Dr. Ibrahim has advised over a half a dozen world leaders on strategy and policy development, with his most recent role being the strategic policy advisor to the chairman of Pakistan's PTI party, Prime Minister Imran Khan. Dr. Ibrahim is also the author of the seminal books, The Rohingyas Inside Myanmar's Genocide and Radical Origins, Why We Are Losing the War Against Islamic Extremism. In 2019, he received the International Association of Genocide Scholars Engaged Scholar Award for his research on the Rohingya genocide. So, Dr. Ibrahim, you have been a most influential voice in favor of the rights of Rohingyas who have been persecuted, and it has been for 3 years. We have seen United Nations have recommended some options, some actions for the Myanmar government and military. They are now coming after the people who are Rakhine, the Muslim people in Rakhine state who are living inside. And we have also seen a very few, or at least very slow responses by the international community. And last week, in fact, the day before yesterday, Bangladesh has appealed to the United Nations Security Council to speed up their actions to repatriate, as it has already become a burden for the country. So, with all this background, I'd like to hear from you. What is the latest developments in the Rohingya crisis from your eyes, and what in what situations we are now?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mumin, for having me, and thank you so much for the Archer Blood Center for inviting me. Obviously, when I first received the email from yourself, all I seen was the blood center. So I thought, as you probably get very often, that there was just a blood bank asking me to donate some blood. But obviously, when I looked a little bit deeper, I remember very clearly I read the biography of Archer Blood, who was a champion of human rights, particularly for those people in Bangladesh. So thank you so much for having me. In terms of the Rohingya situation and what has been the most recent developments, there's two parts to this. First of all, in the international law stage and the international arena, there has been some very important developments in the last year, particularly with the Gambia taking the action against Myanmar in the International Court of Justice for breaching the Genocide Convention. So this has been ruled unanimously by 17 judges at the ICJ that Myanmar has to take the appropriate steps to stop the genocide against the remaining Rohingya in Myanmar, in Rakhine, and try to protect them and not just to destroy any evidence. So this can be interpreted essentially as a warning order from the International Court of Justice to Myanmar. But as you indicated, that Myanmar is not required to report into, in the public domain. They are only required to report directly to the court. So we do not know how they have responded to this action by the Gambia. And now, most recently, we've heard the news that other countries will be joining this action, particularly the Netherlands and Canada. So this is a very positive development, and those two countries will be focusing specifically on sexual violence against the Rohingya minority. So this is very important development on the international stage. And there's also been some developments in the International Criminal Court, which are completely separate to the International Court of Justice. So people sometimes confuse the two. But the International Court of Justice, you could say, is equivalent of a civil court, essentially for arbitration between countries. So Gambia believed that Myanmar has breached the international law on genocide, the 1948 Genocide Convention, which is why it initiated this action. Now, one of the most surprising things I found about this action that the Gambia took is that why did it take Gambia to take this action in the first place? Because clearly this mechanism of international law existed since the convention since the court came into existence. This is the United Nations official court. So any country could have brought this action, but it took a small country in Africa, Gambia, which has no interest in the Rohingya or Bangladesh or even in Asia. I believe that they only had 2 diplomats in the entire Asia before when they actually brought this action. So it was really no interest for them at all to bring this action. So why did it take Gambia to bring this action? Why was this action not brought by any other country, particularly those countries that actually were the architects of this convention, the countries like the United Kingdom and other European countries who actually wrote this? So this was very surprising and at the same time very disappointing that other countries had not actually taken the initiative to bring this forward. But despite that, we are where we are. This is a positive development and something that should be welcomed and should be encouraged and should be replicated in other genocidal or possible genocidal situations. So that's on the international stage. So for the Rohingya on the ground, the situation has not changed at all. And one could argue the situation has gotten worse. But on the international arena front, international law, there are some positive developments.
Do you see any policy blunders from the beginning of this issue by the Bangladesh government?
When this issue first erupted in 2016, even far back in 2016, but 2017, when the Myanmar authorities started to push the Rohingya into Bangladesh. So you have to understand that this is something that Myanmar has been aspiring to do for over half a century. For over half a century, they have been trying to get rid of this minority group called the Rohingya. And in 2017, in fact, one could argue 2016 is when they actually succeeded when pushing this minority, over the border of Bangladesh. And I remember specifically at that time that I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in which I argued that the Bangladeshi government should now use the international media. It should now use this platform that they have to try to get as much sympathy from the international community and also try to pursue Myanmar through the international legal mechanism to hold them to account. And the biggest mistake they could make is enter into some sort of dialogue with Myanmar, because Myanmar is essentially not interested in any dialogue. They have no intention of taking the Rohingya back. This is just a myth. This is just a mechanism that they use to try to buy time, to try to waste time and pretend to the world, to show the world that they are in discussions and they are participating in dialogue. But the reality is that when Myanmar pushed those people over the border, they burnt down their villages, they bulldozed the villages, the land has been completely flattened, they mined the border to make sure nobody ever comes back over the border again. And that land has already been redistributed to local Rakhine Buddhists, so that they have nowhere to actually go back to. And the biggest mistake Bangladesh made was to enter into some sort of negotiation and discussion with Myanmar to try to negotiate how to take the Rohingya back, when Myanmar had no intention whatsoever to take those people back. And instead, all Myanmar did was to show the international media and the international community, the United Nations and others, that look, We do not know why these people are leaving, but they are welcome to come back. We are in discussions with Bangladesh. Here it is, we are in daily regular discussions with the government of Bangladesh to create a mechanism, to create a way, a method of these people to come back. And Bangladesh legitimize that process by entering into those discussions. And when Myanmar had no intention of coming back, and now those people, almost 1 million Rohingya, are a permanent fixture in Bangladesh and have nowhere to go. And the government of Bangladesh is left to feed them and house them and look after them. When the reality is, this was never Bangladesh's problem. It was never it is not their responsibility to look after these people in the first place.
If I'm allowed to uh, critically see the steps taken by Bangladesh, even in her writings and appeals to the international community today and yesterday, Prime Minister of Bangladesh focused only on the COVID-19 and the climate change crises. And we have read some news that she will be also speaking about the Rohingya crisis to the international community in front of in her speech at even General Assembly. But still, we think Bangladesh didn't focus more on the issue, because Bangladesh hasn't announced any special. We think it was needed. Bangladesh didn't announce yet any special advisor or special emissary or special ambassador with focus on with a special focus on Rohingya crisis. From the beginning, Bangladesh made some conditions to be made inside the Myanmar, like making a special zone for the people. And so, how do you see it was right and wise to make such recommendation for another sovereign country for repatriating the Rohingyas? Do you think that was a good idea to
Yeah.
recommend?
So the idea of a safe zone, which the government of Bangladesh is now pursuing, is actually a relatively recent and new idea. Initially, the government of Bangladesh was only interested in returning the Rohingya whole scale back to the country of Rakhine. So that wasn't transpiring at all. It was very clear that government of Myanmar was not interested in taking back the Rohingya, and it was very clear that that the Rohingya could not be forced back. So the Rohingya were asked, how many of them would voluntarily want to return to Myanmar, and the answer was none of them. So not a single Rohingya wanted to return to Myanmar because they did not have a guarantee of security, because there was no guarantee that they would return and they would not be put back into a concentration camp or imprisoned or anything of that nature. So the government of Bangladesh is now pushing this idea of creating a safe zone to guarantee the safety of the Rohingya in order to give them the reassurance that they will be safe and they will be protected if they return back to Myanmar. So this is all essentially to make sure that the Rohingya can go back safely. So this is quite a new and recent development that the government of Bangladesh is now pursuing and exploring, is to create safe zones. Is not something they started from the beginning. I think they came to this realization after they realized essentially that Myanmar has no intention of taking anybody back.
So Myanmar is not going to make it. It looks like Myanmar would not be going to be making a safe zone or the required environment of to go back to take back the Rohingyas, so that they can feel comfortable and they can keep trust on the government. And again, the Rohingyas in Bangladesh are not willing to go in a violent environment to go back. So what is the ultimate future?
Oh well, this is the challenge. This is the predicament that Bangladesh is now finds itself into. Is that they have no leverage at all on Myanmar to return the Rohingya, and Myanmar is under no pressure at all from the international community to take them back. The probability of a safe zone is very slim. Rakhine is a conflict zone. Myanmar is at war with almost every ethnic minority in Rakhine, not just the Rohingya. And these are some of the longest running civil wars in the world. This has been going on since Myanmar became independent. So there's very little chance of it, stopping at any time soon. So this is the predicament that Bangladesh finds itself in, is that they have very little leverage by which to push Myanmar to accept and cede its demands. And Myanmar is not facing any sort of sanction. In fact, everybody in the international community is looking forward to the elections in November in Myanmar. They think this is going to be a huge, the first, follow-up of the democratic transition of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League of Democracy Party to come back to power. And and the European Union is funding the entire election process. So there's no pressure on Myanmar whatsoever. And Bangladesh is unfortunately now stuck with all these refugees.
Yeah, so what you have said and what you want to say about this is, I think it's clear. So we don't see any hope. And again, I want to share with you Simon Tisdale. He has written an article that I have read it just yesterday for The Guardian. He's saying that justice and the Rohingya people are the losers in Asia's new Cold War.
Yeah.
So what is the Cold War here, you see?
Yeah. So there's lots of geopolitical calculations going on at the moment in that region. One of the reasons why Myanmar is under no pressure at all is because they are protected by China at the United Nations Security Council. China has a veto power, and so any sort of sanction, any sort of reprimand of Myanmar is immediately vetoed by China. Now you will ask, why would China intervene in this issue? Why is China even interested? The reality is that China has huge interests in Myanmar. China has ambitions to be a global superpower. But before it can become a global superpower, it must become a regional power. And that means keeping its regional nuclear rival, India, in check. And access to Myanmar gives China access to the Bay of Bengal, gives it access to the Indian Ocean, and they can thus China's navy can bypass the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea, which are disputed territory. So they can surround their Indian rival, the nuclear rival India. So you have this new kind of Cold War between China, India, United States, which wants to try to pull Myanmar into its sphere of influence. So you have these geopolitical machinations going on between nuclear powers. And then, so there's very little interest. If I told you this huge, nuclear powers are competing with each other, there's this minority group called the Rohingya who are being denied their rights. Nobody really cares about that. It doesn't fit into that equation when there's such big geopolitical kind of calculations going on.
When it comes to the point to the issue of Rohingya, we have seen that the India and I understand you are saying that there is some kind of geopolitical competitive rivalry between China and India in this region, and also from the outside or from the Asia Pacific side, US also considered itself as an Asia Pacific power. Then, but when it comes to the issue of Rohingya, we have seen that India and China have maintained the same kind of policy. Do you agree?
I think they're not getting much attention on the Rohingya issues. It's more to do with the fact that nobody really cares, and is not in any country's interest to get involved in this. And I think that Bangladesh, from the initial stages, have mismanaged the crisis. As I indicated earlier, I think Bangladesh should have pursued, when this issue when the Rohingya first started to pour over the border into Bangladesh, and the international media was focusing on this issue around the globe, Bangladesh should have pursued a very aggressive strategy against Myanmar in the International Court and the International Court of Opinion, if nothing else. And they did nothing of the sort. Instead, they allowed the Rohingya to come into their country, which was the right thing to do. But at the same time, they entered into discussions and negotiations with Myanmar, which gave the era of legitimacy to a genocidal government which was pursuing this policy of ethnically cleansing the Rohingya. So this was a mistake from the outset, I believe.
And it seems like that Bangladesh has a good understanding with China about this Rohingya issue. Do you think so?
I once again, I don't know the details about China-Bangladesh relationships, but obviously China is a huge power, a hugely influential power in that part of the world, and many countries are falling under the sphere of influence of China, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm not sure how much of a recipient or beneficiary Bangladesh is of Chinese investment, but that clearly makes a difference to many countries around that region in terms of the influence and power that China can exercise amongst these countries.
And are you happy with the United States role in this
I'm not
crisis
happy
so
with
far?
anybody's role, to be honest. I don't think anybody comes out of this process with their reputation intact. I think every country, even countries that have nothing to do with this issue, have not behaved in the appropriate fashion to uphold international law. The Genocide Convention was the basis that developed to ensure that we don't see a situation like this develop again, as we did during the Second World War. And it seems that every country that was a signatory to the Genocide Convention simply ignored what was happening. Except for the Gambia, of course, this is the only country that stepped up. So I don't think any country has behaved in the appropriate fashion. I think this is a very disappointing situation, and we are now seeing a similar situation now in China with the Uyghurs scale. And once again, many countries are silent on that. And with the Uyghur situation is a little bit different, because here you have China, and many countries are unwilling and unable to step up to China. But with the Rohingya situation, it was actually a lot easier. And the Gambia has shown that there was a mechanism that always existed, but no country exercised it. So this is hugely disappointing, what it says about the international system.
And what we expect more to US to do? What should be the US role?
I think the most important thing that the US could do at this very moment, is and the most realistic thing they could do, is to ensure that all minority groups, that are from Myanmar, are able to vote and participate in the upcoming elections. And that means that even the Rohingya that are in Bangladesh, they should be allowed to participate in the elections. They should be allowed to stand candidates in the elections. And if that does not transpire, then the United States should, and the European Union for that matter, they should refuse to recognize the election results, because it will be clearly demonstrated that the election results are not accurate. This is a false democracy that Myanmar is perpetuating and continuing, with the 25% of the seats already assigned to the military, and the military all automatically controlling the major ministries, whether it's foreign affairs, defense, and border. It's not really a democracy in the way that you and I may understand what a democracy should look like.
And I have 10 minutes more, I think. Do you think during President Obama's tenure, President Obama has visited, I think, at least two times to Myanmar, and there was I must say there was a big push from Obama administration to normalize the relation with Myanmar. Do you now think that that was too early?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and I think you're absolutely right. I think even at that time, people were saying it's too early that to lift sanctions of Myanmar. Myanmar
Yep.
was sanctions, and you have to understand, for a country to get a visit from the President of the United States is a very big deal. So Obama visited twice, and he visited because, as I indicated earlier, the United States was deeply concerned that as Myanmar opens up, this was one of the most closed off and suspicious countries in the world. And as it opens up, it will fall under the sphere of influence of China. So the US was very keen on trying to restrain that transition for it to become a Chinese client state. Aung San Suu Kyi lobbied very hard to have the sanctions lifted, and she was successful. She visited the White House, and Obama decided to lift all sanctions of Myanmar, and this has allowed the military to enrich themselves. Many of the military generals have, huge amounts of money which they have looted from the country. That money is sitting in bank accounts in Macau and Singapore, and they have continued to become wealthier and wealthier because of the normalization of relationships with the US. So the US has tried to target a handful of military officials in Myanmar now because of the genocide, and those do not include the key architects of the genocide. And essentially, it is a token gesture which will not have the kind of impact I think that many people really wanted it to have.
So far I know Bangladesh will be speaking, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh will be speaking, but her speech already has been recorded. But and at this moment, what do you think Bangladesh should speak to the UN, tell to the UN to do for the Rohingya?
I think Bangladesh should use all of its authority and power to obviously in financial assistance to the Rohingya. The Rohingya are costing Bangladesh $900 million every year. It's a huge amount of money for a country which is one of the most densely populated, and it's really a poor country. It's costing a lot of money. So financial assistance would obviously help Bangladesh. But at the same time, Bangladesh should use all of its authority to try to ensure that other countries join the legal action against Myanmar, and Myanmar is essentially forced to pay for all of this, for this disaster that they have wrought upon the Rohingya and upon Bangladesh as well. So it should use its diplomatic leverage to try to push the International Court of Justice action, and at the same time push other countries to join any other sort of action, whether it's in the ICC or elsewhere, to pursue Myanmar legally to pay for all of this.
And why not Bangladesh is a party? Bangladesh is not joining with Gambia or Netherlands and Canada.
I think you have to ask that question to Bangladesh, but I think it's probably because Bangladesh still has to remain as to still have to have some sort of dialogue with Myanmar, and they cannot have that if they are also party to pursuing Myanmar directly themselves. So hence why they must use their diplomatic allies to pursue the action while they are in discussions, with Myanmar. So they have to have that channel open.
And last question is, I have seen from your bio that you have worked for many other countries as a strategic policy advisor, and most recently with Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan. If Bangladesh asks official help from you on Rohingya issues, would you be joining with them?
Well,
As
it's highly unlikely they would ask me for any official help. I am in touch with the Bangladeshi mission in Washington, D.C., so I'm in touch with Ambassador. We've discussed many times multiple things, and so I'm happy to help in any capacity. I don't think they will ask for my help in any official capacity, but I am always, interested in helping. I'm always interested in getting the word out and assisting in any way that I possibly can.
So that's it today. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Azeem Ibrahim. You have been, you are our idol. We admire you a lot, and I have seen your works. You are writing consistently and relentlessly. You are speaking on the Rohingya crisis, and I believe we will salute you for your contribution, especially on the Rohingya crisis. So thank you all. Thank
you
you
so
very
much
much
for having me, Mr. Mumin, and I look forward to talking to you again in the near future.